business. And we have done multiple breaches over recent years. We've also worked very closely with legal firms who work with the insurance companies, and we work on preparedness ahead of a breach. So it's really a case of we tell our clients it's not a matter of when you will breach, but if you will breach, but when you will be breached. So we have great relationships with the likes of Cyber, Clyde & Company on the insurance side, and work with forensic specialists and so on. So that's the team who's going to present to you now. Nick, while you're calling up the slides, I think I'll just get started. You can't share. All right. I think, Nick, you start with the first slide, and then we'll move on. We can share the slide deck later with the participants on the call.
Sure. Thanks, Marina. So I think we'll just kick off by saying that cyber is a very different kind of crisis, right? It's unlike a fire or an industrial accident or any boardroom spat, because there's always a high degree of uncertainty, simply because you just don't know what you don't know. There's a need for cross-functional coordination, as all aspects of the business could be affected. You often have a broader range of stakeholders, including customers, your staff, regulators, partners, and they all have conflicting interests and all demanding different types of information. So companies need to think which stakeholders to notify and when. But they also need to think about when the attack started, whether it's over, how long the effects will last, and what their GDPR and POPIA requirements are, especially within that 72-hour notification period. And then the other question is, when does that 72 hours actually start? A cyber crisis then also often magnifies other challenges within the business, and it can definitely have a spillover effect. And the spotlight is then often on the leadership. There's, in most events, a lack of public empathy, because it is assumed that the company is responsible in some way. And then finally, the risks become extremely personal. Data is taken in a breach, and it can involve future business plans. It can involve your employees' personal information, as well as customer payment information. Some of the trends that... sorry,
you please try and sharing your slides again. We promote you to go host. Hopefully it should work.
Okay, let me try that quickly. Can everyone see that? Not yet. There we go. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let me just move on to the next. Oh, there. Okay. So in 2020, some of the trends that we've seen since 2020 is a significant increase in ransomware attacks. And these attacks have intensified in scale and severity, with threat actors using multiple stage operations to infect as many systems and devices as possible. These have most recently evolved into triple threat extortions, where the threat actor then publicly releases stolen sensitive information, disrupt the victim's internet access, and often inform the victims, whether it's business partners, the shareholders, the suppliers, or, like we've most recently seen, even the media. I will then move on to the next slide, Marina. You're on mute.
Excuse me. Everyone is vulnerable, and it's only a matter of when you're going to be breached. You need to prepare ahead of it so that you can be as resilient as possible to withstand major disruptions, particularly as Nick was talking about ransomware, because that is when your systems are encrypted and you're not able to run the business. So when that happens to critical businesses like hospital groups, for instance, it creates enormous pressure start up and running, and that also gives the threat actors or the criminals an additional point of leverage with regard to being paid. It's really critical that you share information timely, but not that you go out ahead of yourself and have to backtrack later within the crisis. So you can only really share what you know, which is very difficult in the cyber crisis. I mean, clearly you need to learn from the threat. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the insurance sector in particular, because if you go back to when corporates have been breached, so now what? That is just the beginning of the problem for a corporate. Hackers are demanding the ransom. Law enforcement will be trampling all over the evidence. The insurance companies, not to mention the regulator, will be expecting a call if they're not knocking on the client's door already. So in terms of preparedness, what we tell our clients is make sure that you have, and I would imagine the insurance firms as well, make sure that you have the right people in the room, because having the wrong people in the room can only make things worse. If it is a multinational client with a breach that is significant, you can anticipate that the advisors assisting the client that's been breached will be multinational companies like ourselves. The forensic specialists will be international firms. The insurers will be international firms, because these are not single jurisdiction issues. They're multi-jurisdictional. You'll never know where the threat actor is sitting. They could be sitting in multiple jurisdictions. It's important that when we advise our clients that when they're doing dry runs, when they're doing simulations, do them with the advisors in the room. Don't ever underestimate the enormous pressure that the executives will be under in that heat of the crisis. And make sure that the insurance panel has the right suppliers on the panel. Don't go for the cheapest, go for the ones that are the most experienced, obviously looking at the size of the crisis. Set the right expectations right up front, build the right relationships. You need to have the relationships with the regulators well sorted ahead of time. Don't wait for that crisis to happen. And then going back to the insurance premiums, which are increasing. I mean, all clients today, all the big ones would have cyber insurance policies. But the challenge is, and this is a question I would have for you, is does that create a self-perpetuating cycle where ransoms are more likely to be paid because corporates are insured? We've come across situations where some of the companies that will be targeted particularly because they have insurance premium, they have an insurance policy in place. So this is a very big systemic issue that needs to be dealt with at a systemic level with regulators, with big corporates, and with your industry as well. So that's it at a high level on this slide. I think, I mean, we can talk in great detail if you would like, but I think let's keep that for the Q&As in light of the short time frame we have. Nick, I think move over to the next slide, please. This is over to Tim.
Thank you, Marina. So I think, as a communications and crisis management firm and a stakeholder management firm, often the thin end of the wedge, why people call us, is because they're worried about something appearing in the media. They think we're going to have a headline, the headline's going to be bad, let's call people who can help deal with headlines. And it's true, we certainly can help deal with headlines. But I think that is to dramatically underestimate the communications and power relationship challenge that you have if, as a company, you are breached, or any institution for that matter. So let's just, on the left-hand side, look at the stakeholders that you have to manage. Now, the technical definition of a stakeholder is people who you have an impact on, or who have the capacity to impact on you and your ability to meet your strategic objectives as an organization. So what happens? You get a serious breach, or a breach that you suspect may be serious. Maybe you're in ransom negotiations, or you receive a ransom note, or you might simply just know that the system is down and you don't know. And that we don't know is invariably the answer to most of your questions in the start of a cyber crisis. So you have your executive leadership of the company that starts saying, how do we, what is the extent of this breach and how can we solve it? They put that pressure on Chief Technology Officer, who will say, well, we don't fully know yet, but we're about to find out. And then they start an investigation. You have your operational divisional heads who may be denied access to some or all of their systems, and who then have to make an alternative arrangement for how they can keep the company or the state institution, if Transnet's happened and so on, how they can keep things going. And they might need to change their operational procedures, move to a paper-based system, stop delivering certain services. You have your IT department that is under pressure. You have your communications and investor relations department, because by now incoming calls are coming from media to say what's going on. You might have customers, if you're a customer-facing organization, realizing that the systems are down. This will start to affect your share price once the market realizes that you are unable to operate. So then your investor relations people start coming. Your legal department gets involved, because they would, of course, be involved from the start. Your government and regulatory relations people start going, hang on, who do we need to engage with here? What do we say? Your employee and HR department then go, we need to speak to our staff. We might have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are unable to work properly or who need to be informed. You have your security companies, and you have your board. So just as a quick run through, just the internal dynamic and the pressure that starts to be exerted. And who do they exert that pressure on? Well, initially the pressure gets exerted onto the IT department for answers, but the IT department doesn't have all the answers because they are still engaged in their investigation. And at this stage, the coffee machine is starting to run out of coffee because nobody slept for 12 hours or 18 hours or 24 hours or 36 hours as you try to get to the bottom of what the extent and the severity of the attack is. At that point, you then move over to the external environment, who have worked out there's a problem. So how do you deal with your regulators? You have your suppliers and partners that might not be able to access your systems or be able to transact with you. Then you have your investors who start saying, how is this going to affect the share price if this company can't make sales? We need disclosure. You've got the JSE who would say, but hang on, is this a material risk? So the range of regulators go up. It's not just your information regulator. There are other market practice and conduct regulators depending on the industry that you're in. Government, if you're a private sector company, if you're the government, all of your clients and people you're engaging with, it could be citizens and other private sectors companies, and then you've got the media as well. So when you have a serious cyber breach, all of these stakeholders start to have a question about how do they respond, what's going on, and as has been quite rightly said in the chat, and as I said a little earlier, your IT department does not have all the answers at this stage. And what you may also discover is that the threat actor, let's imagine it's a scenario where they are trying to extort Bitcoin from you to either give you back your information or to release one of your systems, they too realize that the greater the pressure that is applied on the company, whether it's commercial, regulatory, or reputation, that is more likely to get them the settlement that they want. So they are not simply passive. What we are seeing, as Nick hinted at earlier on in the presentation, is that these actors will then start to reach out. And we've seen this where they contact the journalists directly, have conversations with them, share information with them. They share misinformation with them. So they might take an element from your breach, then add that to other information that they found on the dark web or that is being traded, put it all together and try and inflate the severity of the breach so that the media then report about that, at which point your customers start to panic, at which point your regulators become even more involved, and the whole system seizes up with additional pressures, and you don't have a single point of truth or final answer that can be given. So that is the multi-stakeholder world. that you have to manage in a situation where you have incomplete information and where your lawyers will be telling you be careful of what you say, because there might be liability. There will be liability of one sort or another. And of course, the complexity of this just rises if you are operating in multiple jurisdictions, because it's not just one set of stakeholders in one jurisdiction. You might even have multiple laws, because the data might be held across different countries, and then which laws and regulators do you need to engage with. So what happens is that the intensity of the pressure is extreme. The ability to give clear answers is reduced. The magnitude of the risk increases, and at the same time, all the various executives involved are trying to maintain a operational organization and to manage their risk. So that's some of the environment that one needs to consider. The main point of these slides is to say, is be very careful about being defensive, being very careful about managing only one set of stakeholders. Employee morale might be plummeting. Don't just focus on employees, remember the regulators. Don't just focus on the regulator, remember financial markets if you're a listed company. Don't just focus on financial markets, because you might have customers to look after. So it's a balancing act where what you say to one of these stakeholders will have a ripple effect on all of the others. And that's where the strategy and keeping a calm head comes into things. The last point I would make just on the slide as you contemplate all of these forces that will be enacted on you is that the capacity to get outside help is very low. So if you go to your regulator and you say, this has happened, how can you help us? Or you go to law enforcement and say, this has happened, how can you help us? The answer is, there's not a lot that they can do. The threat actors may be in other countries, they may be completely unknown. So law enforcement is unable to help you, and neither can the rest of this network. You have to help yourself and then manage the forces and then build an alliance with these forces so that you can buy yourself time to solve things on an IT front and then find alternative systems and mechanisms to manage the rest of these forces. Thanks very much, Nick. We can go to the next slide.
So I won't go through the slide in detail. I thought I'd touch on Tom Carruthers' question in the chat on a feasible solution to prevent a self-perpetuating cycle. As Tim was saying, it's very difficult to, and the track record in apprehending the cyber criminals has not been great. Though I did see something come through a short while ago that someone's been apprehended in Amsterdam for using Bitcoin that was used in the Ukraine breaches. So that was a nation state type attacks. He's been extradited to the US. So the FBI and the international policing authorities are tracking these very big cyber breaches. But look, the one thing I would say as a general principle, and obviously you need to look at it on a case-by-case basis. If your systems have not been encrypted, if you can continue to operate, you're not going to go out of business. I would generally suggest to try not to pay the ransom because you can continue. Look, if data has been exfiltrated, it's been exfiltrated. So even if you are going to pay the ransom, there's no guarantee whatsoever that that data won't be sold on the dark web, that it won't be used to embarrass clients. So it won't be used to embarrass individuals, and it won't be used to try and defraud individuals. So there's one thing. The other thing is to work, and I know the CISOs do have WhatsApp groups, and they do alert each other to what they may see. And the big corporates are trawling the dark web all the time to see what data is out there on their clients, and that's obviously the right thing to do. But the solution needs to be a systemic one, and this is where multiple stakeholders have to get involved, including the regulators, the policing authorities, and they will work with international regulators and policing authorities on the big breaches. If you recall, with the Colonial Pipeline breach in the US, I think it was 2 years ago, which resulted in somewhat of a run on petrol stations up the east coast of America. So that pipeline runs from the Gulf up the east coast of the States. They did pay, but they got the approval of the FBI to do that, and the FBI managed to get some of that Bitcoin returned to Colonial Pipeline. But those are the very big breaches that have systemic sort of fallout across industry, across the economy, and they often have a geopolitical element to them. It's a very difficult one, and it does take a multi-stakeholder approach. But I would, you're seeing corporates more and more coming out and saying, we're not going to pay the ransom, because their systems are not encrypted. They've actually prepared, their tech systems are prepared well enough that they've got resilience built into the system. They know the data has been taken, and they will try and manage the reputation of that. They'll manage it with affected customers. But there's no reason for them to pay a ransom to criminal networks, because that data, once it's gone, it's gone. I don't know if that helps answer Tom's question somewhat. The other thing maybe from this slide, I'd say the key thing is obviously prioritize your customers and the regulators. You mustn't hide what's happened, but only go out with what you know, because you could be very wrong. It takes a long time. Empathy, authenticity, and tone matter significantly, because clients and customers have trusted you with their data, and that data is now gone. And this could drag on for a long, long time. And the danger, of course, for companies that have been victimized is that they could be re-victimized once the fines arrive from the regulator. So they need to make sure they've done the right thing as best they could, and that they've learned from the breach. So Nick, over to the next slide, please.
Thanks, Marina. I think just some closing remarks that we've touched on throughout this presentation is that how you handle cyber and privacy incidents can define the organization for years to come, right? So preparation makes all the difference in your ability to respond effectively in the heat of the crisis. Cyber resilience is underpinned by a culture of secure behavior. You should create accountability and break silos within the organization. And cybersecurity should be integrated across the company because it affects the entire company. And then, as Tim mentioned, get to know your incident response team before an actual incident happens. And also ensure that your board is trained and educated on any cyber risks, both as a business risk and an IT governance issue. So training should focus on the human firewall as well. You should regularly provide your employees and your supply chain partners with tools to protect the organization and themselves, and encourage employees to identify and report phishing attempts, which is often the first port of entry into any systems. I think we'll open it up to any questions then.
Thank you, guys. That was quite informative. I do have a question here from the team, just to say, what happens if carte blanche, for example, a tenant comes knocking on your door as a business, looking for a story, and you're not prepared? How do clients sort of deal with that kind of a situation?
So you'd only have a spokesperson speaking with them. You obviously need social media policies. You need media policies in place. If you don't know what's happened and you're still trying to grips with it, I would not necessarily do the interview there and then. I would provide them with a holding statement promising to get back to them once you have more details. The key thing here is that the threat actors will very often put pressure on a corporate by going to the journalists. So that story is broken. It's out there. You've got to prioritize your stakeholders pretty quickly. And the media can be quite helpful in getting, if you're a corporate with a large B2C consumer base, and a lot of the consumers have been impacted, you need to go out to them, and you can use the journalists as part of that, but you don't have to be pushed into answering questions you don't know the answers to. You won't know who the threat actors are. You won't know how much has been taken. you may know that your systems are down. You may know that you've isolated the server. You don't know if there's been any lateral movement across into other systems. So you must not speculate, and you need proper media coaching for that.
Yeah, let me add to that. You know, when something goes wrong in a company, the natural response is to feel defensive.
Yeah.
To go, it's our fault, and now we're being subject to scrutiny. People are seeing that it's our fault, and we must defend ourselves. The first thing to remember here is that you are the subject of a criminal attack. So who is to blame? The criminals are to blame. And it's very important that you establish that right up front. You might not have, you won't have all the information, but it's important to establish that you have been the victim of a criminal attack. We are not, then, as Marina said, don't say things on a best guess basis, or on a hopeful basis. Don't speak beyond what you know for certain. So there isn't a world where you give a statement to the media and the problem goes away. It comes back tomorrow, it comes back later this afternoon with other media, it comes back in 24/7 on social media. So don't say things that you aren't certain of. You have to be comfortable with saying, we are in the process of investigating. We are engaging with our with the legal authorities. We have been subject to an attack. This is what we know. This is what we can't speak of. You also have to be aware that the threat actors are probably also monitoring the media. So not they can engage with the media, they monitor the media. So you don't give out security information about the details of what you're trying to do, how quickly you think things are going to be up and running. You never make a promise. And so our processes will be up and running at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Nobody panic. And I've seen that, by the way. Very often, because you aren't aware of how deep the problem is within your system, executives, particularly I've seen it with the chief technology officers or security experts, they can get very gung-ho and aggressive. It becomes quite a testosterone-fueled environment sometimes, and people make promises. They say, I'll get these guys out of the system by lunchtime tomorrow. Like, leave it to me. We've got them solved. And you can't promise that, because it might not be the case. In fact, it probably won't be the case. Every single attack we've advised on has lasted longer and been deeper and more complex than was initially thought. So be very careful about what you say in the public that makes a promise that you might not be able to keep, or which gives the threat actors a sense of what you're going to do next, because they can then bedevil your plan by either leaking information to the media or doing something within your system that you might not have known about. And let's be clear as well, they might be watching what you're doing. So if you're busy emailing back and forth on a compromised system, they can see what you're doing and they can respond. The other thing to be very aware, and Marina made this point, but I think it's worth holding on. The media is not just a threat to you. They can also be an ally. They can help you reach your customers and stakeholders and manage their expectations. So for instance, if you have to maintain your ongoing operations, and say, for instance, your booking system is down and you are dealing with customers across the country and they're unable to use that system, you will need to communicate to them what alternatives they have. So if you've moved to a paper-based system and you want people to call up to confirm their appointments, for instance, maybe it's a healthcare group, and hospitals or clinics and people, or dentistry and so on, and you had a electronic booking system. Now you want people to call in and to confirm, because you've moved to a paper-based system while you try and get your systems up and running. I mean, and this has happened. I'm actually channeling a previous example. The media can help you get that information out to your customers. to say, we've been subject to a cyber attack, this particular system is down, we will still be servicing, but we appeal for all of our customers to please be patient, to please confirm via telephone, this is the number. If you're having any issues, this is who you can call. So each of your stakeholders who are subject to a major inconvenience for an attack, you have to think about what you want them to do to help you, and then communicate to them. Call this number. If you have an issue, log it here, and so on. So that's why this doesn't sit within the IT department. IT department is responsible for only one part of your cyber attack response. It affects all the rest of the business, and the rest of the business then needs to think, how do they manage all of the people who rely on them? And that then happens in real time. So your media can also be an ally.
One more thing I would say is put all your official, say if you've been breached, all the official statements should reside on a public website, preferably your own. But if that is down, you might have to set up a microsite. Direct everyone to that updated, add frequently asked questions, explain to customers and clients how they need to protect themselves, because there will be fraud attempts off the data that's been taken. If all our ID numbers are out there, many breaches in South Africa over the last 10 years. And hence we get all these calls all the time. So you need to give people the tools so that they can protect themselves. And you keep updating that website, and any social media interactions, I think just keep directing them back to the website, which is your official statement.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Tim and Marina. I think you raised a good point there at the end, Tim, in terms of how the policy responds and how clients should always be ready and know what not to do and how to use the media and how to communicate with their stakeholders. This is something that I would like our brokers to understand, that from a policy perspective, giving you access to the likes of a Brunswick with their deep knowledge in terms of how to deal with the threat that is not only an IT element, is something that gives a good value to your clients. And this is why we're having this session, so you can understand broader than just fixing the breach that has happened and covering the ransom. There are a lot more elements to be looked at than just those two. I think Nadia, our claims manager, has a question for you guys. Go ahead, Nadia.
I would just like to know, have there ever been instances where things have been handled really badly on the PR side and you guys had to come in and do damage control? What was it like, and how did things, and what was the outcome in such a situation?
Yeah, there have been examples. I don't want to mention names, but there are some international and local examples, and it impacts the share price. It impacts the corporate's reputation with its employees, with its clients in particular. Regulators impose really heavy fines. CEOs have lost their jobs. Chairmen have lost their jobs. CISOs have lost their jobs. So you could compound an already a very severe operational issue by dealing with the reputational side of it very badly.
So I think, why is it that people lose their jobs? Why is it the share price falls and so on? And can do so dramatically, and why is it you get those big fines? The people have to trust you. And sometimes what happens in a crisis, in all crises, by the way, not just cyber crises, sometimes what happens is the extreme pressure that public scrutiny and the scrutiny from all of those different stakeholders, phones are ringing off the hooks if the phones are still working, and people want to make a statement that makes the pressure go away. And they think, well, if I just say something really hard hitting, or I issue a passionate denial that there's any problem, that the problem will go away. And the world just doesn't work that way. So where people make big mistakes in their public communications, their PR, their media communications, and so on, is where they go into denial. And they try and issue a denial in the hope that the reality will match their denial, and it doesn't. Where they overpromise, our system will be back up and running, by lunchtime. There's no issue here. Move on. Where they are exposed, so that they don't know what's going on. When they say this, the system breach is only here, but actually it's elsewhere. And because so many people are interacting with your systems, the scrutiny is not just from the media or the regulator, it's from every one of your customers or every one of your clients, everyone or every member of the public that is engaging. So when they engage with your organization that doesn't work, they will tell people. Now, what does that do when that comes back to you? It shows either that you are incompetent because you have made a statement in the public domain which doesn't match with reality. And what does that do? It means these guys are incompetent. They don't know what's going on. Or it means you can't be trusted, that you did know what was going on, but you lied. So those are the two judgments: incompetent and therefore shouldn't be in charge, or liars and therefore shouldn't be in charge. So the game that you need to be in, and this is a leadership position, which, you know, in every crisis you have to lead through it, is you're in a contest of credibility to be the most credible voice on what's going on. Now, sometimes let me use an analogy, and it's not about good or bad news, by the way, which is the easy default. This is all bad news. Let's put out some good news. It's not going to make your system come back online. Let me use an analogy. If you go to your doctor and you have a pain, and the doctor says to you, I only have good news for you. Everything is absolutely fine. Now, the words the doctor is using sound good, right? There's nothing wrong with you. It's all good. But your experience of the situation is that it's not all good. You can feel the pain. Do you trust that doctor? Or do you go to the doctor and the doctor says to you, I have done a diagnosis and I'm afraid there are some problems here. And that's why you're feeling this pain. But we have a plan to help you through this. And these are the steps we're going to take. We're going to do the following tests and diagnoses. We are going to give you the following treatments. These are the range of specialists and other doctors that we are going to consult, and dietitians, physiotherapists, whatever the issue happens to be. And we, as the doctor, are going to work with you to solve your health complaint. Which doctor do you trust? You trust the person who has told you what the problem is and told you how they're going to work with you to solve that problem. And that analogy is the same for the leadership here. And if the doctor says, I don't know yet, but this is the steps we're going to take to find out, you say, fine, I will follow you on that journey. So take the analogy back to your public communications. Here is don't lie, don't overclaim, and make sure that what you are telling one set of stakeholders matches what you're telling the other set of stakeholders. See it as a dialogue that you take your stakeholder universe with you on this process as you combat the criminal, as you diagnose the risk to your firm, and as you set about solving the problem. Because then you are showing them how you are solving their problem too. It's that set of stakeholders with you against the criminals, not an unresponsive or uncredible organization that has got your data, that has lost your data, and now it's your problem, and they refuse to admit what the problem is. Then you've lost trust, you've lost credibility, and your problem is bigger than it was before.
I think well put there, Tim. And I think a stat that I'd like to throw out to the audience is that when we look at the cost of a data breach in total, part of that cost, totaling 38%, comes from lost business. And that lost business could come exactly from what Timothy had just mentioned. You lost trust in the corporation because of how they're communicating with you or how they're dealing with the situation. And again, this is why we have the experts in the room to sort of try and help us on this journey to go along. A question to the panel, just to say, The policy provides your service. We cover the costs for your service when assisting with an incident. How would those costs look like for a client who doesn't purchase a cyber policy, as an example? What would they be expecting, the numbers to look like, as an example? Is it, as you mentioned earlier on, some of the cases can extend for quite a long period of time. What would those costs sort of look like? If you give us maybe a hypothetical example.
So we wouldn't have we don't have itemized costs. The way we would do it, it depends on the size of the breach. It depends on the size of the client. We could scope it for the first 24 hours, the next 72 hours. We could scope it for that first week and do a high intensity crisis fee for the first week, then move down to a lower intensity fee. What we've done with one client now, which was multi-jurisdictional breach, we moved from the crisis, which was a weekly fee, high intensity, low intensity. We moved on to the reputational rebuild phase. And we've just finalized that. We included in that research on what their key stakeholders thought about them. And off the back of that, we're helping them with a new narrative and a new re-engagement plan. Because you don't want these clients to go straight back out there and start marketing themselves when they haven't dealt with the issue. But the other thing I would also say, which is not cost related, but just something to bear at the back of your mind, Tim was talking about some gung-ho, macho kind of feelings, and often it's a defensive mechanism. Yes, we've dealt it, it's sorted. Corporates are often re-breached. Might be because the threat actors work in this very shadowy underworld on the dark web, and they deal in Bitcoin and they resell the data. They also resell ransomware as a service. So they teach other people how to re-breach you. They know that you've been breached. They know the vulnerabilities are there. And you could be re-breached. So you must be very careful about being gung-ho and going out too soon. We have seen threat actors on Telegram communicating with media and others, and actually asking the public to let them know if they could see breaches and vulnerabilities in South African corporate infrastructure and public infrastructure. So the Eskoms, the Transnets, the government institutions, they were actually recruiting on Telegram, which is quite a terrifying thought, actually. And anybody comes forward to them, they'd get paid in Bitcoin. So it's a lucrative business and a terrifying one.
Yeah, indeed, that's a very scary thought to say that the attackers can be recruiting general public to assist them in their endeavors. So from our end, there's no further questions on the chat as I can see. I'm not sure if you have any last remarks on your side. I'd like to say thank you to yourself, Timothy, Marina, and Nick for a great session. I think the audience would have taken a lot of value out of learning a little bit more around the crisis communications and how to lead through that time period. So thank you again for your time.
Luando, before you go, maybe I should just mention something.
Sure.
Prevention is better than cure. Now, ideally, you're going to have, there's an IT prevention, right, that you can think of. Update your software, inform your staff. Don't come in with your flash drives and all these kinds of things. So there's a range of things that IT people can do. But if we accept that at some point or another, every company is going to be breached, and that breach is then going to have sort of potentially huge follow-on consequences, and this is an ongoing thing, then the question that insurers should be asking is how to minimize their exposure. And the best way is to ask the people you're insuring. So, well, what preparations do you have, and what preparations do you have beyond just your IT? So what are you doing for cyber crisis simulations to improve your overall resilience? Now, we think about this in industrial processes all the time. If you've got a factory, people go, well, how often are you running your fire drills? How often are you going through all of the safety mechanisms? Everybody still parking facing outwards, or people parking like they do when they go to Pick and Pay? So we are in the habit of managing our risk for industrial and mining processes by running simulations, by checking that the entire organization has a safety first mindset. The same kind of lens should be applied to cyber risk, to go, have you run the simulations, not just the IT simulations, but have you run the whole company simulation so that you're able to respond competently to this? And the cost savings are immense. If you're just 1 day quicker in response, if you just are able to manage all of those shareholders so you get either no fine or less fine, that your customers don't leave you, that your regulators don't fine you, and there's multiple regulators. If you're just that much better, every step of the decision making, including how you might be having to negotiate with the legal authorities and how you might be having to negotiate, through intermediaries with the hackers and the ransomware. Your organization is better, and ultimately the cost to the organization and the cost to the insurance industry that has to cover all of these things is reduced. So as a parting thought, I would say, what are you doing to improve your resilience? Because you know it's going to happen to you.
Exactly. I think you couldn't have said it any better. I think, Nick, you also touched on it in your response earlier in the chat around, the preparedness and building that muscle memory. And I think we also try to tell, our brokers and our clients that the incident response and testing and planning pre-incident is a lot more effective than post-incident. So thanks again for those words, Timothy. Thank you all again for your time. And I think we will close this session there. There's no further questions in the chat, I can tell. If anything does come up, we will be communicating by email, and hopefully we can, put something out to our brokers. Thanks to all the brokers on the call today. We had a fantastic turnout. I think we reached close to 500 attendees, so that's quite a good turnout for today's session. We will be hosting another Cyber Thursday session in September, so do look out for the invite coming soon. Thank you once again, and have a great day further to everyone that is on the call.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Luanda. Thank you, Nadia.